Well, about the lessons learned from Do Not Harm action, about the restitution process, in terms of three main elements for this approach. First is the context reading. We consider that when we're reading those contexts, an interesting exercise has been done. Reading from the historical perspective, but also from the current perspective, the situation surrounding the territories where the land restitution is taking place. Somehow, what's coming in the next 5 years with a scenario of peace is to be able to read this context in key with the demobilization process, but also with the focalization that the national government is doing to take the accords from the Havana to execution. We think that is going to affect, we hope, possibly, the restitution processes that are on the way and that are happening. A second very important element that has to do with Do Not Harm action are the impacts. So far, what impacts has the land restitution process had? Positive impacts in terms of obviously having given back the land to many families that today see crystallized the access to a fair life condition. Of course, there are other effects and impacts way more subtle which have to do with the daily relationships. The people who have returned after 10 years and whose neighbors don't identify with them and don't have a relation with them either. The contexts are not the same productive terms, even in terms of the physical environment. Situations where the families have been fragmented because the youngest members of the family want to remain in the cities, but those who are deeply rooted want to return, then those are families that now have to decide who returns to the property and who doesn't. And of course, we obviously have other situations already referred as the conditions of the policies that have not yet allowed the rulings to be comprehensive as many judges wanted. Many of the rulings have integrated not only the restitution measure, the formalization of the returned property, but instead have articulated actions, productive material for education, roads, and these are far from being possible. They don't make the comprehensive restitution feasible, so the people become firmly rooted to these territories again. Those are conditions already identified institutionally. Probably at the beginning of the process, they were not that clear. But today, it is necessary for the institutions also to stop telling us that that wasn't projected, that they didn't know it was going to occur. Instead, to start acting accordingly so all these dilemmas can be solved. And the last aspect is related to the goals and principles that guide the land restitution, the Do Not Harm action approach, at least as we understand it in Colombia. It has a very key ethical aspect, deeply rooted. And this ethical aspect can be viewed from an ethic of the principles that guide the actions. The principles guiding the actions in this case, the restitution, are in kind of two logs. One immediate, one direct with the emission of the restitution that has to do with revert the dispossession and the abandonment, and one medium and long term that will have to do with achieving peace and reconciliation in the territories. In many scenarios, we have seen that instead of achieving any of the two, the restitution must, and it is in depth with the families, with these territories, because the rights over land have not been effective, because the ruling or the rulings have not succeeded in fulfilling, and the duty of reconciliation must generate conditions for peace. It is also remote when the same dwellers feel most of their needs unsatisfied, or when they come into conflict with other habitants in these territories for the possession of the same land. Then those are warning calls, which we believe should make us surround the restitution, support the processes, also highlight the critical situations, but also let us note alternatives that allow for those immediate and long-term goals to be fulfilled as we all Colombians wish.